What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. And before I introduce my longtime friend and sister of an amazing human being, Bronwyn De Maso, a.k.a. Price, I'm going to do a little housekeeping. I am here at the amazingly awesome Yellow Jacket Media Studios. My man Taylor's on the other side of the glass doing his thing. I usually do a dedication at the beginning of every show. I will dedicate the show to the person we're going to be speaking about tonight, Commander of SEAL Team 4, Job Price, Pottstown High School graduate, the man, the myth, the legend, God rest his soul. So Job is who I'm going to dedicate the show to and who we're going to spend the next hour, maybe two, discussing. Job was a friend of mine. We went to high school together, graduated together. And I'm very proud to be able to do a show with his sister and share his story. Show is brought to you by E4 Strength, my company. Great part about being an entrepreneur is you can sponsor yourself. So I am sponsoring this show. E4 Strength, e4strength.com is where you can find out more information on the amazing E4 technology, which allows you to offload weight from a lifter on any apparatus, free weight, barbell, or otherwise, and allows you to build muscle faster in a safer environment. If you want to learn more about that, go to e4strength.com. All right, Bronwyn, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Awesome. So just to give everybody a little bit of history how Bronwyn got into the studio today and why we're here. So my guest that I was supposed to have tonight had to reschedule. So I posted on Facebook and I said, hey, anybody have someone in mind that would be a great fill-in guest that has a compelling story to tell? I've always wanted to tell Job's story, but I didn't feel it was my place, and I certainly didn't want to be asking his family whether or not it was okay to share it because it's a very sensitive topic. A friend of ours posted Bronwyn's name, tagged her in the post, asking for ideas for guests, and Bronwyn said yes. And the plan was originally that we were going to talk about Bronwyn's community service and the things she does in honor of her brother. Working with Travis Manion Foundation, which I'm wearing their shirt tonight. Shout out to Travis Manion Foundation. If you don't know anything about that, you definitely need to go to their website, Travis Manion Foundation. They're amazing. They do amazing things for the families of fallen veterans, and very worthwhile charity if you're looking to throw some shekels at a worthwhile cause. And then on like Friday, things shifted with Bronwyn. We weren't, her father and her and Job's wife had a conversation, and they came to the determination that maybe we should finally take the leap and share Job's story. And I'm very honored that they're going to do it on my show for the first time. So without further ado, Bronwyn, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
This is going to be, I want this show to be an honor to your family, to your brother's legacy, to his wife, to his daughter, Jill, everybody that knew Job. I want them to look at this show and go, I'm so thankful they did it. And that's kind of what, the stress as a host and someone who knew Job since I was 13, that's the stress I have, is to try to make sure that I lead this show in a direction that allows Job's full life to be seen and felt and understood and appreciated. And I know as his sister, having lost my brother myself, I understand how hard it's going to be at times to have this conversation about your brother. And I thank you for being brave enough to do that.
Thank you for having me.
All right. You've listened to the show, I hope, right?
Once in a while, I would have to say.
Good.
Maybe this is the first time.
All right. We're going to edit that out. Just kidding. So I asked one question. And I'm not going to change the premise just because it's Job and you. The question I ask, and usually it's about the guest, but today I'm going to ask, who was Job Price?
Well, when you told me that was going to be your first question, I do want to honor my brother to the best of my ability. There are lots of things I could speak of, such as his character, his dedication to his country, to his community, his love for his child, his wife. And, you know, I asked my little boy this morning, he's 11, Job's nephew, Luca. I said, Luca, who was Job Price? And he said to me, he was the greatest man I ever knew. And he was a hero. And he said, and he was my uncle. And I think, you know, for me, he was my brother, you know. So all this other stuff is something I'm very proud of him for. But when it comes down to it, he was my only sibling. I equate his loss to losing an arm, because I think you might understand that from losing your own brother. It changes your whole family dynamic. I went from being a sibling to an only child, having to worry about my parents by myself, watch my mother die by myself, things like that. But my brother, for me, he was my support system. He was the person who knew me best, and I was probably one of the people who knew him best. And he was, as his little sister, someone I always looked up to, always wanted to be like. He had great values. He had just a way he would walk into a room. He was the kind of person, when he walked into a room, the whole mood shifted. And if there was any awkward sort of pre-jitters or, you know, uncomfortable feelings, Job would walk into a room and with his life and his personality and his sense of humor would just breathe a whole new vibe into that room where you just wanted to be around him, because he would make you laugh that hard. He was that funny and smart and just a good person.
Well, you hit it on the head. You know, I didn't have the luxury of growing up with him from day one like you. I met Job my freshman year of high school. I went to Pottsgrove up until 9th grade, and I transferred to Pottstown High School. We moved around a lot as a kid. My family was poor, so we were sort of transient. But we stayed for the longest period of time in one place when we moved to Pottstown. And I can remember my first day at school. Job was in my first class that I had, and I was lucky enough that a couple of the kids that were our age I knew from. They lived in Pottsgrove at one point in time and were now at Pottstown, so I had a little bit of an introduction to Pottstown from them. But Job was one of the guys that first introduced himself to me, and for the next 4 years, he became the gold standard by which I wanted to be. And I don't say that in kind of like a weird, goofy way, but he was the guy. You know, I finished 10th in the class and he would finish number 1. And he was always the person that I attained to become. He was my competition. He was the person that challenged me. He was the one that, we both got appointments to military academies, and we were the only 2 in our class. And it was something that we shared. It was a bond of brotherhood that was maybe different than he had with his really close friends. We were in 3 or 4 classes a day, every day for 4 years together, but we didn't necessarily have a social best friend type relationship. It was more of a respectful, scholastic level relationship. But Job was always, everything you just said about him is true. He would walk into class and literally everybody would be doing their own thing, and Job would walk in and everybody's eyes would shift, because you just wanted to see what smile he had on his face. That goofy, he would have the goofiest faces. And I'm just literally transporting myself back in time to like Mrs. Huddy's English class or something. You know, it was like he would walk in and he would just light up the room, and he would always have some comment to say on like he'd walk by a person and make a comment about what shirt they were wearing or what shoes they were wearing, and not in a bad way, but just like bust balls and get everybody engaged. And he was just that kind of magnetic personality. And his life and the life that he lived reflected who he was always. It wasn't some shift. You know, I know a lot of people that were one way when they were younger, and then when you see them when they're 40, they're completely different. He was literally the same person, high moral integrity, goofy, funny, life of the party kind of guy, his whole life. And that's what I remember most about him.
Yeah, he wasn't much of a partier as far as like a drinker back then. Like I always would have described him as a rule follower, yet still able to hang with anyone. Like Job could hang with the nerds. He could hang with the cool people, the jocks. I really feel like he had friends on every social circle and was very inclusive.
I don't know if you remember, I wrote after he died an article, not an article, but something on Facebook that
Right,
was,
yeah.
you know, Pottstown is a small urban town.
Mm-hmm.
I say small compared to like a city, but we've had some pretty famous people from Pottstown. Daryl Hall, whose actual last name is Hole, if anybody cares, Hohl. You know, Aaron Beasley, Howard Brown. We've had a lot of famous people come from Pottstown. And I wrote this on the 30th, I think, of December, 8 or 9 days after Job died. And Pottstown gets a bad rap, but Pottstown's produced some amazing human beings, some world-changing in their own environment type people. You know, Job is at the height of that list. He's the top. His service to our country, his acclaim and his accolades and his achievements outweigh any of those. You know, Daryl Hall's, you know, in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's, you know, how many #1 hits, but he couldn't hold a candle to what Job has done. And when you look at the grand scheme of life and what impact you can make on the world, nobody did it better than Job. Nobody. So when I was looking up to him, even though we're the same age, when I was 13 years old, it was like foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Like I knew he was going to be great, and that's who I wanted to be like. And I can tell you, Tommy, Skit, everybody had that same admiration for who he was as a human being.
And I really feel like he really loved Pottstown. He had the opportunity. He could have gone to the Hill School, but he loved going to Pottstown. He was the epitome of Pottstown pride. And, you know, whenever I hear someone hashtag Pottstown pride, always think of Job. Like he loved being a Trojan. He loved his teammates. He loved his friends. He continued to come back to Pottstown to visit his friends long after his career changed. He made a point of getting home just to see those people that he were his family. You know, Skit spent almost every holiday at my house.
Right.
He lived up the street from my grandparents growing up. He was probably Job's first friend he found, but he was like a brother. Tommy was like a brother. I'm sure to some extent you were like a brother. And that's who Job was. Job loved people, and he was proud of Pottstown. He was proud of his school. You know, Mr. Armada had a lot to do with that too. But yeah, Pottstown was a big part of Job. And I think Job was a big part of Pottstown.
Oh, without a doubt. And I think one of the best analogies I use is that Job was the guy that, and you kind of hit on it. You know, Job was a two-sport star, not just an athlete, but he was the star wrestler. He was a star football player. He was a good-looking guy, big guy, you know, carried himself well. He had great, you know, magnetic personality and all that kind of stuff. But it didn't matter if you were the skater rat, the nerd, the shop guy, or an athlete. Job probably was your friend.
Yeah.
And you can't say that about everybody. I mean, I tried to be like that, but I don't know if necessarily I achieved that ability to just sort of blend into any environment.
Well, I think one thing that made him special was even though he tended to always strive for greatness, he never allowed that over somebody else's head. Job was a simple guy. He was the best of the best, but he also never was someone to brag. And I think people respected him. They respected him because he was not boastful. He was modest. And I think that speaks a lot to his character.
I 100% agree. Now, let's go back a little bit before high school. Let's talk about Job, growing up with Job in your home. I know your mom and dad are amazing human beings. Unfortunately, your mom passed, but your dad is still sharp as a tack.
Yeah.
And you know, he was, you know, Your dad was the headmaster
associate headmaster at
the Hill School.
Yeah.
And I mean, so he was a well-respected person. And you mentioned that Job had the opportunity to go to the Hill School and have any private education that he wanted, if that was the direction he wanted to go in. But he wanted to be with his friends. He wanted to be part of the town.
Yeah, I think something a lot of people may not remember is when Job started, when he started at Pottstown in 7th grade, he was a wrestler and he lost, I think, every single match. Like he was just pin. And he was the kind of person that he didn't let that make him a quitter. He'd be like, oh man, I can't do this because I'm not as good as everybody else. No, he let that drive him. He started lifting. He spent hours. I mean, talk about dedication to one's self. He spent hours exercising, lifting weights. He was religious about it because he wanted to be better. And so that's what I remember about him. Like I was his little sister, so I looked up to him a lot. Obviously we had our own sibling rivalry going, but I always respected my brother. And it's funny because when I got up to Pottstown, everybody saw me coming. They were like, whoa, Job's sister. Oh my God, I'm tall. I'm pretty tall for a girl. I'm 5'10" now, but back then I was tall. And they were all like, oh, Job's sister's here. Like, he was such a great athlete. They thought, oh, yeah, we are set. We're going to try out for the basketball team. And I was just the kind of kid that was like, yeah, I'll do whatever you want. Oh, sure,
right.
Basketball. They were thinking I was going to be. I'm so clumsy. I didn't play in one game. Last game, my parents came to every game. Last game, they put me in warm-ups. I broke my finger. Like, that's who I was. So I think, but Job, he had a lot of dedication to self and to improving oneself and respect of oneself. And that is what led him to be the star student and the star athlete that he was. My parents, they expected us to do the best that we could. And Job did that.
One thing that I remember clearly, I never understood the difference between me and Job is that I was smoke and mirrors and Job was all effort. And I'm not ashamed to say that. I was a 4.0 student, but only because I had an innate ability to remember shit.
Yeah.
For the amount of time I needed to remember it for, dump it into a test and then forget about it. I didn't work hard to do that. I had this gift to do that. So I relied on that as my smoke and mirrors. And I always said, oh, I want to be like Job. But the reality is I had no idea how to be like Job. Like, I didn't understand the amount of effort it took to be exceptional in not just schoolwork, but athletically. And we were talking about it coming in. You said, weren't you in the band? I'm like, yeah, I never really learned how to read sheet music.
Yeah.
Why? Because I probably took too much effort. I knew the basics, and the rest I just sort of figured it out. I have an ear. I can remember sounds. I remember patterns, and I memorize stuff, and I just figured it out, and that's how I did it. But I never worked hard at it. And I'm not ashamed to say that now. I would have been ashamed to say it when I was going through it. But, I did a run across New Jersey back in 2008 to raise money in honor of my brother who passed. And it was at that moment when I ran 78.8 miles, having never run more than 23 miles in 1 week, what it was like to truly give everything that I had to something. And I was 37 years old when that happened. It took me all that time to figure out what my very best was. And Job knew that. Job knew the process of exceptional behavior, of exceptional work ethic, of exceptional effort. He knew all that at a very early age, which was, I think, the thing that kept him at number 1 in the class and me at number 10. And his ability to become an all-league football player, an all-league wrestler. That's the thing I think that I'm most in awe of, is that he understood at such an early age what it takes to be the best, not just fake it till you make it.
Yeah, I think a lot of that my father instilled a really good knowledge of what you need. You know, my dad came from a poor family. I don't know if you know this, grew up on a dairy farm, and walked 10 miles each way in the snow uphill both ways. You know, that
Backwards
kind of
on a horse, right.
yeah, that kind of a life. And my dad's he had 3 brothers. They all came from humble beginnings and ended up being very successful, and they did that through education. And my father had always taught us the importance of education. That education is the key. I remember driving with my dad in the car and my brother, and he would say to us, who do you want to be? Who do you want to be? Do you want to work hard now so you don't have to work hard later? Or do you want to screw around now and work hard the rest of your life? And so I think a lot of that work ethic did come from my father's humble beginnings, knowing how important it is if you want to succeed in life to, it's up to you. It's your choice. It's
right.
The choices you make. The person you are is your choice. And
we need more Harry Prices out there today.
Yeah, we sure do. I'll tell you. I'm proud to have him in my own children's life because he really is an exceptional father. But Job had great values, and he never deviated from those values. And when he could have gone to the Hill School, I think, part of it was he wanted to do it himself. He didn't want to be somebody's son. He didn't want to be told that he was doing well because he was related to Harry Price, and maybe he wanted to go to Pottstown because he wanted to do it. And he did. I mean, he got accepted to Yale. I don't know if you know, Harvard, a couple academies. And I still remember the day he was making a decision because, it was a tough one. Yale's very prestigious. He liked the school. And I remember there were 2 envelopes and, acceptance letters. And my mom said, well, you know what we'll do? I'll put them behind my back and you pick one. And so he picked it and he got Yale, and he kind of went, oh.
Which,
and it was not.
No one in the world has ever went with Yale.
Because I think deep down inside, he really wanted to go to the academy. And it was because he has always been very patriotic. He came from a military family. My father was in the military. My uncle was a colonel in the Air Force during Vietnam. My little cousin, he flew fighter jets in the Air Force, went to the Air Force Academy. So I know he looked up to that lifestyle of duty and honor, giving back to your country, being a part of something greater than oneself. And that's why he made the choice he made to go to the academy, is because he believed with his whole heart that he had to be a part of something that he could give back to his country.
I remember, and I was fortunate enough to be going through the process at the same time as him. I had received an appointment to the Coast Guard Academy, and he got the Air Force Academy, and we were both going through the application process and doing all that together, meeting with the guidance counselors and doing all that. So I remember his excitement when he got the letter stating he got the appointment. And I remember we both talked about, I knew at an early age that I wanted to be a cop at one point in time. And I also knew that I wanted to serve my country. And the best way to get to bridge the gap between high school and being a cop was to do that. So that was kind of my goal. And I just remember we used to have these deep talks about America and how amazing it would be to graduate from an academy, be an officer and lead men. And at the time, he never mentioned anything about the Navy SEALs. But I knew his love for service and duty on our country, and going to the academy was one of those the greatest accomplishments of his life. And I think that's a really good transition point to talk about his life when he was at the academy, and what the growth from what you saw from a senior in high school until when he graduated 4 years later from the United States Air Force Academy. Did you see a change in Job as he matured into a more polished young man?
Well, one thing I do remember is when we dropped them off, they don't get to come home for Christmas, freshman year. And they were playing, I'll be home for Christmas. And, you know, kids are crying. And even he was probably like, whoa, what did I get myself into? Job, I have an album of his pictures from the Air Force Academy, and he was a joker in all these pictures. Like, you can see, like, he's taking funny pictures, like pretending he's asleep on his desk and stuff like that. So I'm sure Job was the life of the party there as well. But he was always just dedicated. I mean, I wasn't with him like at the academy, obviously, so I can't speak for that, but I can speak for when he came home, the change I saw. And like, I remember he'd come home in the summer, and my grandmother lived with us. She had some health issues, and she lived with us for about 17 years. So he'd come home, and my grandmom loved Joe, but she just, anything Joe wanted, he was just the greatest. So he'd say, Grammy, sit on my back while I do push-ups. And then I'd have to squirt him with the hose. Like, that's what he did. He couldn't just do push-ups. He had to have somebody sit in his back.
Right.
So he had to wait while he was doing push-ups. And I mean, that goes back to his lifting and love of, you know, bettering his body and keeping in shape for what he had to do. But by the time he got to be a senior, you know, I did see a slight change. Just, you notice, you know, you make that transformation from just a normal person to a military person. I think there's a lot of training that, I mean, you could speak for this better than I can, that goes into making these boys men. And
it's a process, and it's a proven process. So
the academies are tough. I remember, like, he would sleep on the floor so he didn't have to remake his bed.
Yep.
And I don't know if that was allowed or not. I hope we can't get him in trouble now. No. But, you know, that's the kind of stuff that, you know, they make you do. There's the upperclassmen, you know, I don't say haze, but, you know, they give a hard time to the underclassmen. And so he rose up through the ranks. And I know he was well liked, because I've been reached out to by many of his Air Force Academy roommates and friends, and they've all said how much they love Job and admired him, just like you're saying.
So when Job graduates the Air Force Academy, when did he make that decision?
Well, he made it before, because upon graduation, he cross-commissioned into the Navy, because you don't cross-commission into the Navy SEALs.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So he cross-commissioned into the Navy. Someone had come to speak at the academy about Navy SEALs, and I think when he heard that, it was all over.
That was it, right?
I want to be the best of the best. And he that's all he wanted. He wanted to be a Navy SEAL. And so he cross-commissioned the Navy, and then he went to BUDS. And
for people that don't know what BUDS is, it's basic underwater demolition. It's the basic training for Navy SEALs, essentially.
Yeah. So and he passed that in his first, you know, tries, and that's not an easy accomplishment, as you well know.
One of the funny stories I'll tell, I obviously knew Job went Navy SEALs, and I would see him when he would come home on leave, and whether we were at a local bar, Frankie Johnny's, or wherever we were at. Shout out to Frankie Johnny's. Best bar ever. And if Yetsy's listening, if you ever decide to sell that, I got first dibs. I'll buy it. I want to keep it exactly as it is. But I remember when I became a Federal Air Marshal after 9/11, and my first day in the office in Philadelphia, it was actually in Atlantic City, but it was the Philadelphia field office. I walk into my boss's room, office, and, you know, we're having like a get to know each other session, and I'm just looking around his room, and I see pictures on the wall, and I see pictures of, you know, a bunch of men in like Speedos, and I'm like, well, that's not a picture to have. Like, just the first thing I think of is, why does he have his swim team photo on the wall? Like, that's the first thing I'm thinking of. And I didn't really know much about my boss at the time. So I get up, and he wasn't in the room yet. And I'm looking around, I'm looking at the picture, and I see Job. And I'm like,
in a
hold
Speedo.
on.
Job his
Yeah,
feet
yeah.
up.
I'm
You're
like,
oh.
hold on. This isn't a swim team. This is the Navy SEAL team. So my boss walks in, and it's always good to have a like an in. I'm like, so how do you know Joe Price? He's like, excuse me. So I was just looking at your pictures, and I saw Joe Price in there. He goes, how do you know Joe Price? I said, I've known him since I was 13 years old. And he's like, well, he was my lieutenant. I was his first, when he was a SEAL, that was Job's first team that he commanded, and as a lieutenant. So that was my little transition. Job bought me some good graces
Some
with
good
my
graces,
boss.
yes.
It was one of those moments that you're like, I'm gonna be okay. So Job graduates Air Force Academy, goes to Buds, graduates from Buds. Where was his first SEAL assignment? Do you remember? Was he out west or was he East Coast?
No, he has always been East Coast, and his first, I believe, was SEAL Team 2.
Yep.
South America. I remember he went to South America a lot. I know he went to Korea. So has been on SEAL Teams 2 and SEAL Teams 4.
So for people that don't know, obviously SEAL Team 6 is the one everybody talks about. That's the
all the even numbered SEAL teams are based
on the East Coast.
On the East Coast,
yep.
And the odd are based on the West Coast.
SEAL Team 6 is the one that gets all the glory, but there are multiple teams out there that do different. They have different responsibilities, and their operation requirements are different. But one of the things I think that Joe, when you graduate from one of the academies, you're an officer, so you're not an enlisted guy. So he immediately became
an ensign.
Yep, an ensign. So he had to become. He had to go through the same training though as some guy that's enlisted, going through Buds training. He's an ensign going through Buds training with a bunch of guys that he's ultimately way higher ranked than, but going through the same hell. And I think that's part of one of the cool things about special operations. Having worked in the Federal Air Marshal Service with a bunch of guys that were former SEALs, Delta Force, Special Forces, Rangers, you name it. I got to have a lot of time with these guys, and the mutual respect that comes between the enlisted and the officers is very different in special operations than it is in traditional military. You go to if he had any other job in the Navy, if he was on a boat somewhere in the middle of the Mediterranean as an ensign, his understanding of what the enlisted guys go through is much different than having gone through Buds training as a SEAL. And I think that is something that helps create that bonding component within that community, whether it's Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, Force Recon, whatever. That bonding component of going through the same hell that everyone else went through is kind of what brings everybody together. And it's kind of the same way in the Air Marshal training and then on SWAT team as well, but to a much smaller level. But to me, Joe went from being a new Navy SEAL ensign, and within, what year was that? That was probably
1994.
94. Okay.
And it was SEAL Team 4 was his first team.
So 4 was, and then 4, he went to 2, and then came
2,
back.
And then 10.
Oh, I didn't know he went to 10.
He was at Naval Special Warfare 10. And then he went to Special Operations Command Central. Then he went to 4, Central Command, and then Joint Special Operations Command. He was at JSOC from 2008 to 2010. And
then
he was.
Then he became commander of SEAL Team 4.
Yeah, he was assigned to Combined Forces Special Operations Component Command in Afghanistan and served as director of special operations. He was like planning liaison element to Regional Command South. And then he was commander of SEAL Team 4. So
Joe pretty much did it all.
And he was also an Army Ranger. Like, that's something a lot of people don't know about Job. Job, I think it's one of the things that made him a great officer was he went to the Air Force Academy. And a lot of being a good officer is being able to communicate with different branches of the military.
Oh, yeah, communication, cross-communication is key.
So he knew that, he was going to have a lot of opportunity to, interact with Army. So he decided to become an Army Ranger, too.
How that I'm not 100% confident on this answer, but I think that's probably pretty rare.
Very rare. And I can't give you any numbers on that, but I know I've not met many.
And that's, and I will say this from what I do know about the special operations community is it's very, each, Delta Force believes they're the best. Navy SEALs think they're the best. Army Rangers think they're the best. Special Forces think they're the best. And rightfully so. They're all equally great. There isn't a lot of cross-pollination in that having, like, say, a Navy SEAL become an Army Ranger. It doesn't happen very often because of, it would almost be saying that I'm not good enough as a Navy SEAL. I need to add Army Ranger to my resume. And while that is absolutely not the way it is, but that's that community, that egocentric driven community of special operations, which you have to have. You have to have that elite mentality when you're in that.
Well, and I think it goes back to, you were talking in high school how he could get along with anybody. And that's who Job was. He was someone who would have been able to bring different branches together and show them that it doesn't matter what branch you're from, we're all working together as a team here. And I think that's something important to say about Job and his desire to command to the best of his ability across lines.
I think having been prior Army and worked with a lot of Rangers and understanding the training that's required for that and the level of commitment, I think it goes to show the understanding of what his job required as a Navy SEAL, and especially when he became more of a leader within the SEALs and a higher ranking member of the SEAL teams, that he realized that having as many qualifications, as many experiences, as many interactions as possible with the best would make him the best leader in every environment that he can find himself in. And I think that's, like you just said, it goes back to his desire to always want to be the best and be associated with the best. I think, one of the things I found remarkable is that, it's tough. It's tough to be a SEAL, period. But it's even tougher to be a SEAL when you're married. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little about Steph.
Job, at the time of his death, he was married. He had a little girl. We don't talk about it a lot for their privacy. It's been a rough time, and a lot of families of SEALs are targeted, especially one as highly ranked as Job, who was involved in many different operations that would have put his family at risk. So we try not to name them, or, I don't post any of their pictures on social media. Right. But Job met Steph, and they had a great relationship. She was a supportive wife. Being a military wife is not easy. A lot of people don't know. And, Job would go away 6 months at a time. He'd come home and his baby wouldn't remember him. Yeah. And I don't think a lot of people know that's a sacrifice that many make. Army guys go for a year. So a lot of them don't even get to see their child be born. Job was lucky enough. He did get to see the birth of his daughter. But, every time he'd go away, he'd come home, and it was like up until probably she was about 4. It was almost like she didn't know him.
Right.
And so, that's tough on a father to have to, you see your baby pulled away from you, things like that. But he made every effort to, make that bond stronger. He used to take her to do all kinds of, like, build a bear. Can you picture a big Navy SEAL taking this little 2-year-old in to build a bear, But yeah, he was a great father, great husband, and Steph was by his side. I would say Steph was almost like his right arm, because she supported him, and it's not easy to take on the challenges of war. You have to have somebody who's on your side when you come home, who can and help you try and get back to normalcy. And I think Steph did a good job of that.
I think that's the one of the struggles of not just special warfare, but any soldier or service member, is that the reintegration when you get back from a combat zone or combat tour is reintegration back into normal life. You know, the routine of getting up and house got to be cleaned and groceries got to be bought and communicating with your wife and your child. It's tough. And I know, you know, a lot of the people don't recognize that, you know, from Vietnam, we'll say Vietnam until the Gulf War with a couple minor skirmishes in between, most people that went in the military didn't have to deploy anywhere. Like there was no war. There was no conflict going on, any major conflict going on that required long periods of time when you're away.
Right.
And you know, since 2002, roughly.
Or if you were away, you weren't at risk of being shot.
Right. Know? Right. And that's the, you know, from 2001, 2002 timeframe until present day, there hasn't been a month where we weren't. And
18 years.
18 years of conflict. And that can wear on relationships, that can wear on individuals, that can make people tired and all those things. But it's a natural thing that should happen. Like you're not a robot, right?
Right.
Life happens to you sometimes. And when you're in the military, that's literally what it is. You don't have a choice in the direction you're going. Life is happening to you, and you have to adapt, improvise. You know, there's a famous saying, improvise, adapt, and overcome. And that's what the military is all about. And that's what they train you for. And especially in special warfare, that's what the Navy SEALs train Job for.
Yeah.
Just to make those adaptations, to improvise, adapt, and overcome, and to be able to reintegrate back home when he was no longer on a deployment rotation. And I think the best part of a special warfare guy, special operations guy, is having that center base, that person that holds you together when you come home and it helps with that transition component.
Yeah, and I obviously can't speak to their private lives, you know, but I can speak for the fact that they survived a lot of things that other people might not have made it through. You know, there's a high divorce rate in the Navy SEALs. There are a lot of women who have a hard time with that lifestyle for good reason.
Oh yeah.
And to Stephanie's credit, she never wavered, and I love her for that. I know my brother loved her dearly, and she's a good woman. That's how I describe her.
I think the part of the reason why I mentioned that is because of the resiliency that Job showed, and that the steadfast nature of their relationship, and Steph's willingness to be, especially when he rose the ranks. You know, she became a very high profile within the community as a wife taking care of the things back home.
Especially when he became the commander, SEAL Team 4. You know, she had duties that she had to go to when someone lost their life. You know, she was there. You know, she was supporting wives. That was her role,
right?
As a support to the men who were in Job's command, to their wives.
I think the last deployment that Job went on to Afghanistan, as commander of SEAL Team 4, I don't see, there's nothing that I've heard from you, from your father, from anyone that was close to Job that would lend me to believe or think that anything was different from that deployment versus any other deployment he went on beforehand.
Yeah, you know, what I will say is, you know, when you are in a military family, that this is their job. This is something that they do, and you almost become numb to it. I, for example, I didn't even get nervous anymore when he went, even though I knew he was doing dangerous things. Like, he'd come home so many times, you almost think, you know, they're invincible, and it's not going to happen to you. I do remember, though, last time I saw my brother was at my uncle's funeral. They were spreading his ashes down in the Chesapeake, and that was the last time I saw Job. And we had breakfast together that morning. He wanted to have breakfast with my kids because I have 4 kids. So I don't know how much of that he can take, but he did his best. Like, he sat there at the table while they were dripping Cheerios all over the floor. And I remember saying, I said to him, yeah, are you scared? And he said, scared of what? And I said, I don't know, scared that you could die. And he said, no. He's like, it's greatest glory is, that's what we sign up for. And if it happens, so be it. That's a soldier's, they sign up. They know what they're risking.
Right.
And and the thing that people don't understand is they do that with open arms. They walk into a position, a job that they know every day they might not come home, and they do that voluntarily, and they enjoy it.
Yeah.
But I remember Job walking away as I was driving with my kids. I remember looking back, and he was going running. Of course, it was like 7 a.m. He had to go for a run because that's who he was. He always was running. Every morning he'd get up and run. He was religious about it. And I don't know, looking at him run away, I thought, geez. For some reason, I had this weird feeling. I said, God, I hope that's not the last time I ever see him. Mm. And it's funny because I said that to Steph, after we found out what happened. I was like, yo, I had this weird feeling. And she's like, you know what? So did I. Like, but you put it in the back of your head. And I don't know what you'd call that divine sort of intervention, giving you some kind of a clue of what's to come, or premonition. I don't know. I don't really believe in that stuff. But I do remember I was slightly worried this time. And I don't know, maybe it was because it was such a hot time when guys were getting killed. That year was a vicious year where I would say it's probably one of the deadliest as far as soldiers' lives being lost. Afghanistan was a dirty war.
Yeah.
They were using SEALs for something that they not necessarily were trained for. These guys are in and out in the middle of the night. And I think a lot of troops had been withdrawn, and it was kind of like took out the head and left the tail, and I think it was there was a lot of risk, and people knew that, and they knew that, and they go, but you do what you're told. You go, you do what you have to do. You do your job, and I think that's what happened. They all go to do their job, and Job went to do his job. He just didn't come home that time.
Well, this is the hard part.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be the difficult segment of the show where we transition into discussing the events that led up to and including Job's death, and then the questions that were left unanswered after.
Okay.
And I think I want to lead with, as a prior service member, a veteran, combat veteran, I respect the hell out of the United States military, every single branch, every job, every person. As a cop, we're under a lot of scrutiny, always. And people want to believe that every cop is perfect, and every cop is never going to make mistakes, and every cop isn't going to be potentially open to some sort of improper actions. Reality is that's not true.
Well, we're all human.
Absolutely. And I think that's the premise that I'm going to try and make first with this, is that we're all human, and that no profession is perfect, and you're not always going to bat 1,000. And what the stuff we're about to talk about now is not directed at any one particular branch. It is not directed at any one particular person, but rather the specific situation that happened with Job and why it seems like something's not right. And I think while it may be a larger problem, I want to make sure that we don't cast a blanket over top of the entire Navy SEAL community saying they're all fucked up. To me, I want it to be very, very clear that we are not casting aspersions. We're just simply trying to get to the bottom of a very fishy story.
I think that, I myself can say that I've met a lot of these men, and they are all exceptional human beings. They are the best of the best. And I have the utmost respect for, what they do every single day as far as protecting my own family back here. And I recognize their sacrifice and their wives' sacrifice and their children's sacrifice and their parents' sacrifice, because I have met a lot of Gold Star families since my brother died through wonderful organizations that support people like myself. And I have the utmost respect for all of these families and the Navy SEALs and all the branches of the military. I just, I think that my point of coming on today is that I had a brother who came home in a casket, and we do not to this day know what happened.
Right.
And I think the point is someone does. And
Yes.
I think, people want to say the grieving family. Well, I've had a lot of time to grieve, Matt. C.S. Lewis wrote a really good book called A Grief Observed that talks about the various stages of grief. And I've been through them all, as far as, being mad and feeling sorry for myself. And probably, a lot has happened in my own life as, a cause of what happened to my brother. And, that's just something that happens. That's, in some ways it was a gift to me. I look at life differently. I value things that I didn't value before. Like, I know what matters.
Mm-hmm.
I know that my family matters. My kids, the people I love. I tell them every day, you meet any of my friends, even my kids, I'll say, hey, you know what? And they'll go, no, mom, we know. You love me. And people say, God, you say that a lot. Because I know that that's important.
Right.
I know it's important that you don't let things go and you speak your truth of who you are, and you don't live behind some shadow. So my goal in doing this podcast is that I want answers, not just for myself, but for my father. My father, he is the greatest man I've ever known, and he deserves to know what happened to his son. And I think I was really happy that when you approached me, I've been looking for a platform to be able to address these issues that would be, non-threatening to anyone, and would speak truth without a lot of, what is it that Fox News calls it when they make fake news?
Right.
Or, I don't want a lot of BS involved. I just want to speak what I know, the facts. And I want answers about what happened to my brother. And I'm hoping that doing it through you, as somebody who knew who he was, I guess a lot of people could look at me as a crazy sister who's grieving, who doesn't know what she's talking about, but I'm far from that person.
Right.
I have spent hours of my own time with my father, reading through death reports, looking at autopsy photos, trying to figure out what happened. And I think that there is someone out there who can shed light on that. I mean, tell me what you think.
So, amen to what you just said, by the way. Very eloquently stated, and I think it was on point on what the target of this conversation is about. So I will lead with that. The day that I found out about Joe dying, and then the manner by which it was reported it happened, first thing I said, it was no fucking way. Impossible. It didn't align with the person that I knew. It didn't align with the resiliency, the mental fortitude, the internal strength, the get shit done mentality, the improvise, adapt, and overcome. It just didn't match with that. But I had no knowledge of any details or anything like that. I just knew whatever was put on Facebook and scuttlebutt talking with high school friends and stuff like that, but nothing concrete. I did a deep dive this weekend. I've read probably 2,000 pages worth of information, and I remember every detail. And when I talked about my gift in high school, that's my gift. I can remember shit enough to use it for what I need it for and then forget about it. And I can tell you that all it did was validate my initial just gut reaction as to what happened to Job, and continually reinforced the doubt that I had over the official findings of his death. So before we deep dive into any of that, let's first talk about the reported death and how it happened based on NCIS and Army investigator reporting. Let's go back to December 22nd, the morning of December 22nd, 2012. Can you walk us through?
I can walk you through from my own viewpoint.
Yep.
So I woke up that morning. You know, I like to think I had that was a new phase of my life that morning, because up until that point I had lived one life, and from the moment I got that news, I've lived a different one. I used to call my sister-in-law a lot when Job was on deployment, just because she was home with a kid by herself. That's hard, especially around the holidays, lonely. So I made a point of calling Stephanie whenever I could. Now I have 4 kids of my own who at the time were all under the age of 8 or 9. I remember clearly every single event of that morning. I woke up and we were opening advent calendars, and I said, "Hey, kids, let's call Aunt Stephanie and say hello." And I dialed the phone. That was one of those cordless phones before we all had cell phones. Now nobody has a phone, and somebody on the other end of the line, now this is a little cloudy to me, said hello. And I said, "Hey," and I don't know, for some reason, I didn't know if that was Steph or not. And I said, "Oh, is Stephanie there?" And they said, "Who is this?" I said, "Oh, it's Job's sister." And at that time I started hearing voice. I could hear other people in the background. I thought, God, is she having what's going on? Is she having a party at 9 o'clock in the morning? And somebody got on the phone. I'm pretty sure it was Stephanie. And she said, "Job's not coming home." And I was kind of confused. I thought, oh, is she talking about, well, I know he's not coming home for Christmas. So I know he's not coming home. And she's like, "No, Job's never coming home. He's dead." And I kind of remember just in that moment, people describe outer body experiences to where I felt like I was looking up. I remember looking in the corner, like my eyes turned to the corner. And I saw my son, because I must have said, "Oh my God, Job's dead." And my little boy was crunched in a ball, just crying, "No, no." And I took the phone and I threw it on the ground, because I was like, I don't want to hear anymore. I can't even believe it. Are you kidding me? And I started running around, and my ex-husband was from Italy, so he had a little bit of accent, and he says, "Oh, they want to talk to you. They want to talk to you on the phone." I'm like, "I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't know. They have to talk to you." I got back on the phone, and they said, "You can't tell anybody. We haven't told your parents yet." And I just, in my gut, was sick to my stomach, because the thought of them going to tell my parents was, I thought, oh my God, my dad's going to have a heart attack. And I said, "Well, what do you mean I can't talk to anybody?" They're like, "You can't tell anybody he's dead. Nobody. Until your parents know. And you can't talk to them." Well, that's a hard thing for me to do, knowing that my parents, and I was far away. I was living in Louisville, Kentucky, and my parents are up near Philadelphia. So there was no way I was going to get there first, but I would have liked to. And I just remember just this feeling of, oh my goodness, wow, my parents are getting ready to just have their world rocked. Like, I thought one of them was going to just die right there from, just the shock of it. And they're like, "We're sending a medic. We're sending a medic. Some SEAL team guys are going up there, and, they're going to take a medic with them for your dad." So then I started thinking, well, no, nobody told me how he died. I was like, well, how did he die? And they're like, we don't know yet. I'm like, what? I was like, was there anybody there I can talk to? Like, and they put some representative that they assigned to Stephanie to assist her through this process. I don't know if you know, the military assigns a person to follow them through the whole process, everything, that, you know, to help them. And the guy got on the phone and said, we don't know what happened yet. So what do you mean you don't know? He said, well, they found him shot in the head. And then they hung up. And I was like, found him shot. I remember going through my head, found him. What does that mean? Found him shot in the head? Like, somebody killed him. And I said, wait. I said to the guy on the phone, I said, wait, are you trying to say he killed himself? They're like, oh, we don't know what happened. And I remember hanging up the phone and I turned to my husband and I go, oh my freaking God. You're trying to say he killed himself. And like, just the thought of that was so far from anything I would have ever expected in my life. Like, I cannot say, oh, well, he was depressed his whole life, or, oh, he was screwed in the head. No, this man was like a machine. Like, he had been doing this for 6 months shy of 20 years. No freaking way. I mean, that was my initial shock. And I remember I had this neighbor and I was like, oh, you know, you want to tell somebody, you want to talk about it. So I was like, I'm going to go over to the neighbor's Russian lady. She's like, in Russia we drink here, vodka. I'm like, yo, no. It's only like 9:30 in the morning. I can't drink vodka. She's like, no, you do. You in Russia to the dead, we drink vodka. So here I am in this Russian lady's kitchen doing vodka shots. Had like 2 of them. And just thinking, whoa, what in the world happened? And then they got up and they told my parents. I remember I called home and they had sent officers to my parents' home, two people at least. I know they sent more initially, but 2 people stayed the entire week or 2, whatever it took to go to my brother's, you know, funeral and everything. They had people followed them all through that process, drove them around, stuff like that. Answered the phones, wouldn't let us talk to any. They wouldn't let my parents talk to anybody. And at the time, you know, it's a shock. Like I call it like a shock loss. You know, there's all different kinds of death. There's death where like, okay, you know somebody's going to die and you have time to prepare for it. You know, there's death maybe, you know, somebody's sick and then there's these losses where like all of a sudden they're gone.
Right.
And you're not expecting it. And that's kind of what it was. But I just remember from the beginning just thinking, are you kidding me? He killed himself? They're trying to say he killed himself? And just something never sat right. And I was at that time, I would say, you know, you could have probably told me anything and I'd have believed you. And they said, don't talk to anybody. And we said, okay. You know, these people know what they're doing. We don't know what they're doing. They're protecting us. Don't talk to the news media. Don't. Okay, we won't. But in retrospect, I think we made a mistake. Because the next thing that happened was Fox News. I'm not blaming Fox News because it was on all news things, but I just happened to watch Fox News, so it was on my TV screen. Popped up, Navy SEAL commander commits suicide. I was like, oh my God, they're putting it on TV? Like, are you kidding me? Like, I just found out, and now everybody in the whole nation knows. And that was it. One little blurb. Top Navy SEAL commander commits suicide in Afghanistan. And I thought, wow, we're going to have a shit show on media. We're going to be on TV shows. This is going to be a nightmare. We're on anything. Nobody ever asked us a question. And I don't know why that was. But for him being as highly ranked, he was, I mean, don't quote me on this, but he was definitely one of the highest ranking people to die in Afghanistan.
Right.
And there was nothing until the conspiracy theorists started. And I'm sure you've read some of that, which, you know, a lot of it is BS. And I do know that, you know, when the news media printed about his death, oh boy, those internet trolls, I wish they knew how hurtful their words are to people who are like related to these, like for my brother. like they wrote horrible things. I'm sure you read
Yeah.
some of them underneath in the comments about you coward. Good for him. I'm glad he died. He
Right.
deserved it. Just awful. And that was kind of what we dealt with there for a while, was a lot of whispering and people talking, and it just that stigma that goes with suicide. You know, I'm pretty sure it was hard for my father, because I think my father almost felt like he couldn't really talk about it anymore.
Right.
You know, somebody who had, you know, lived his life, was never going to be a quitter. And these people were calling my brother a quitter. And that's hurtful, you know.
How long after his death did it take for his body to get brought home?
Well, we found out he died December 22nd, which is when they found out he died. And they had him home. We got his body from Dover Air Force Base at about, I would say, 4 o'clock in the morning, Christmas Day.
So less than roughly 72 hours.
Yeah.
And in those, the reason I asked that question is because I've never heard in a traditional investigation, any law enforcement investigation that I've ever been a part of in 26 years as a cop, a body being released that quickly to the family. Because of, especially with the, you know, and the thing that keep, you know, I've read all this information and we've had many conversations. And the one thing I'm looking at this not from a vantage point of Job's high school friend, but as an investigator, as a cop. What am I looking for in clues, and was there anything that we could have seen foreshadowing that maybe Job was in some sort of crisis or anything like that? And everybody I've spoken to says no. Reading all the investigations, even the ones that the statements that I believe are a little suspect, none of them stated that anything that about Job's, you know, a couple of weeks prior to his death led them to believe that he was in crisis. The question that and those things are all suspicious.
Yes.
But the thing that sticks with me the most, there's two things. Number one, what type of investigation could have actually been done? You know, to fly from the Middle East to Germany to Dover. I've done it. It's a long flight. Yeah, it's 18 hours. Yeah, with some fueling stops along the way. So you look at it's rough, we'll call it 48 hours of time from the time he died till the process of getting him shipped home.
Right.
What type of investigation, how thorough of an investigation could have been done in that short a period of time, number one. And then I'll point out my second point in a little bit when we get to that part of the story. But so your family receives Job's body on Christmas Day, which to me is, it reeks of a rush job, and it reeks of a lack of common decency that you would bring home one of the highest ranking members of the Navy SEALs, a commander of a SEAL team, highly decorated commander in the United States Navy, that you would release his body on a day that is meant to be a celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ. And kids all across the world are expecting Santa to come down their chimney and leave gifts and the Christmas tree. And the only thing that your family has to remember of December 25th, 2012 is a casket being taken off of a C-5 airplane.
Yeah, it was definitely the moment that my children all realized that maybe there is no Santa Claus. Yeah. My son and I were down on the base, and well, I had Christmas presents, but I didn't have time to. I'm kind of like a wrap the night before kind of person. Right. And I said to my husband, I was like, "You're gonna be Santa," and I think that scared him to death. But I remember I didn't think, God, I have nothing for Mateo. And he was, 9. He was probably, I'm sure he was to the point where he may have been having suspicions, I would think, about whether that's real. But, to wake up and not have Christmas, that's, instead be getting your uncle's body off of an airplane. I'm sure that was probably life-altering moment for him as well.
When the day that you received his body, and what was the United States Navy, specifically the Navy SEAL community in Norfolk, like that while you were there? What was the support level?
They were great. They were amazing. They brought meals to my sister-in-law. 3 meals a day. They had some people. They never left her alone. There was somebody at her house. Now, for me, it was a little different. I was staying in officers' quarters, and I didn't have a military ID. And what happened was Job was brought home Christmas Day, but they couldn't have his funeral till January 3rd because everybody was on vacation. Like, they didn't want to do a funeral for some guy over Christmas and ruin everybody's Christmas, or New Year's. So they waited till January 3rd to have the memorial service. So Mateo and I were stuck in that. He's funny though. He says, "Remember when we lived in that hotel and ate Doritos for lunch?" But it was. They were great to me. Like, they were great. I know they were great to my sister-in-law. It's Navy SEAL Foundation.
Great group.
Great group. Fully supported my family from the moment it happened, as far as making sure, Steph had what, she needed and support. They did give her support during that time.
So the memorial service happens in January 3rd, and he was buried at sea.
That was much later. Like, January 3rd, he was buried at sea, and then we had a memorial service in Pottstown.
Yep, I was there for that. Yeah.
His little girl, they did with all the SEAL boats. I don't know the exact terms for the boats, but they brought her out on that like inflatable one that the SEALs use, and what's it called?
I don't know the exact name of it.
Me either. But then Jillian dumped the ashes, and just to show you how funny my brother was. So when we were at my uncle's funeral, he was cremated as well. And they had a little baggie with the ashes, and Job and I are on the boat, and they dumped my uncle into the bay. And then they took the bag, and he turns to me, he goes, "Hey, there were still little pieces of him in the baggie." He goes, "If I ever die, make sure they rinse out the bag." So, like, after they dumped his ashes in, I turned to the guy, I was like, "Yo, I have one request as a sister. Could you rinse the little chunks out in the water?"
Right.
He requested that.
Right.
But yeah, a little Job humor up into his funeral.
And that's the best part, is that you have those. He wasn't afraid of dying. He wasn't afraid of what the job entailed. He wasn't afraid of the situation he was in. He wasn't oblivious to the fact that potentially the outcome could be that he dies, and he was Job enough, for lack of a better word, to ensure that the awkwardness of certain things doesn't become awkward.
Yeah, exactly. Totally, my brother.
And that's just a microcosm of who he was as a person. So I remember the service in Pottstown, and it was an amazing remembrance of a friend, and a lot of people came, and it was just a really special tribute to Job. How soon after once the rigmarole of the funerals and all that stuff ends, and all the memorial services end, when did the level of suspicion, the level of doubt, when did that increase to the point where you knew something was amiss?
Well, I would say that right from the beginning, I had my doubts, and I know my father did. We just had a really hard time knowing who he was and what he'd been through, believing that somebody who I spoke to on November 14th, my birthday, for the last time, was completely normal a month earlier, showing no signs of depression or, joking with me on the phone, just like normal. Back so much so that sometimes when I look back on it, I wish I'd said something better, knowing that was the last time I would speak with my brother. but hindsight's 2020. And I could tell you right now, my brother's the last person who will want us to sit around crying, and that's not really who we are. I'm not gonna lie, there are moments, and you know what it's like. You hear a song or memory passes, makes you feel bad. But for the most part, I have not believed that my brother killed himself from the first day. I was willing to accept the possibility because I know that the human mind is something that no one can ever know what's in someone else's mind. Like, I do realize that I have never seen war or casualties where my friends are blown to pieces and I'm picking up pieces of their arms and legs. I fully identify that I don't know what kind of trauma that could give to a human being. But I do know that my brother had been doing that for 20 years, and it was not his first rodeo.
Right. It was his 14th deployment.
It was, yeah. So he don't want to say, he even said to me, this is what we sign up for. So for him, he would have recognized the death of his teammates as, yes, tragic, because he loved them, I'm sure. Because you know how Job was.
Mm-hmm.
Job was a very caring person. But Job knew that that was the cost of war.
Right. And
that our job was to do the best that we can do and bring your guys home. And I'm sure it weighed on him that he lost those guys, because I know that, especially like my sister-in-law said, they were young kids, a couple of them.
Yeah.
And they had their whole life ahead of them, and they were good guys. But that's what they signed up for too, and that's the truth of the matter. I find it really hard to believe that he would have let the weight of that bring him down after everything he'd been through and all that he had accomplished. But I think the suspicion started for me to where I was like, whoa, something is really not right here. When I started to get some clarity, probably when I was on that base.
Mm-hmm.
And I started talking to some of his teammates and friends. Now, these were not necessarily, all his crew was deployed pretty much. So it wasn't people who were serving while this happened. I've never really, except when they brought his body home, I think, a couple of the people came up and said, I'm sorry for your loss, that kind of thing. I've never had a conversation with anybody who was deployed under his command at that time about what happened.
Right.
But I do know that I was talking to his one friend, and we were just like, this makes no sense. And this is a guy who had served with him on various deployments and was a very close friend of his as well as mine. And we just thought, this doesn't make any sense. Like, we have to get some answers. And that was the start of it for me, I know. And my dad never believed it from the moment it happened. Yeah. And it wasn't we don't want to believe it. It was like, we just don't believe it.
Right.
And
I think one thing that through our conversations is that there was never any, I've had a lot of suicides as a cop. I've been hundreds of suicide crime scenes. 99.999% of them, there was a catalyst that happened prior that you can point to say this is why it happened, or there would be a note, or there would be multiple attempts in the past, or whatever the case might be. There was always some precursor to it. I think the thing that was the most troubling about the official finding of Job's death being a suicide is that there was never any explanation as to why, how. Things didn't add up when you asked for explanations, things didn't add up to justify their finding. And I think that's a good transition point here, is because I think we have to get into a little bit of the details.
Yes, please.
And I think while we all agree that the person that Job was not one that would choose that exit strategy, especially not with the timing of the season being right before Christmas, that he had wife and kids at home, that he was a commander of a unit That was, a lot of pressure on him to succeed in the mission that they had, that, committing suicide mid-deployment would put everyone at risk. There are just so many factors that would say that's why Job, knowing his personality and his mentality and his morals and his ethics, would say that he would never. Those would be the reasons why he wouldn't.
Right.
And then conversely, you would go, okay, well, why would he? And I hear crickets.
Yeah.
There isn't a single moment that I could say would.
The NCIS tried to find a reason, and I don't think they could find a reason. As far as he had a great marriage, he was financially stable. He was looking forward to, when he came home from this deployment, going on to be trained at the graduate level in military.
Yep, he was going to go to war college.
Yeah, war college. And he was excited about that. They're going to be in Boston, up there somewhere. Nothing that you would say, he had no substance abuse problems, things like that. Nothing that, were any flags as far as, oh, okay, well, he's in trouble and maybe he couldn't take it anymore.
Right. So the day that he died, there's a couple red flags that go up for me as an investigator. Number one, he was found at about between 10 a.m. and 10:30, somewhere in that ballpark, by a fellow SEAL because he was late. He didn't show up for a meeting.
Right.
They went to his room. The room door was unlocked, and which, according to everybody that I've spoken to, is abnormal. Leaving especially as a commander, you have your personal effects and things like that in nature while you're sleeping, to leave a door unlocked. Number one, and he was found dead with a gunshot wound to his head. At no point in time was there any definitive report of a gunshot.
Correct.
And in the type of building that they stay in over there, they're concrete buildings with metal doors. It is literally like being in an echo chamber. It is loud. Every noise is amplified. So if a 9mm round from a 6 Sauer went off inside that room, it would have been heard. I don't care how hard you sleep. If you're a trained warfighter, you are well aware of when gunfire goes off. It's not something you become immune to.
I mean, and I'm no investigator other than having watched CSI on TV, but I know that as just a civilian, the one man who said he heard a noise, did nothing to, investigate it in his report, said that his room was 80 feet from Job's. And he heard something that could have been a pallet, but didn't really sound like a pallet. It was something unusual, but he was too tired to check it out.
Not enough to get him out of bed.
Not enough to get him out of bed. Now, you're in probably one of the most dangerous places in the world right now. You hear something that's out of the ordinary. I would think your basic instinct for survival or whatever you want, self-preservation, would at least have you go knock on your buddy's door and be like, yo, did you hear something weird? Did you hear? Not ignore it. That's just my own personal opinion.
And the report says that one happened sometime around 1:30 in the morning.
1:30. And then there was another report that stated they heard the same kind of thing. Could have been a pallet, loud boom noise. Didn't think it was a gunshot, until in retrospect, looking back, oh yeah, that may have been a gunshot. They said 5:30. So those are two very different times.
4 hours.
Yeah, and that was the one thing that, when I first started reading over the report, made me wonder, well, how did no one hear a noise from a pistol in a space where people have told me that to talk to their wives, they had to be like, shh, shh, because, they could hear the noise traveled. So I would think a gunshot would, vibrate through something and make a noise that would at least make you concerned.
Right. So that's number one.
Right.
So that was the first thing that I noticed, was the lack of definitive, this is when we heard the gunshot. The second thing that really surprised me was the events once he was found, as far as crime scene preservation.
Right.
I've been on 1,000 crime scenes. I've seen many dead bodies in my lifetime. I've investigated several murders. I can tell you that there is standard protocol that is followed by every law enforcement agency in the world, not just like Collegeville Police has theirs and then the Navy has theirs. It's the same.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you're on Pluto, Mars, Jupiter, or Earth. It's the same. You process a crime scene systematically with certain requirements met every single time in order to preserve evidence and to preserve the continuity of the crime scene so that there is never any question as to whether or not something is as it was found at the time that the crime had occurred. And I'm not going to get into too many details, but having read the reports, after numerous people had been in and out of that room, after finding Job dead.
And it even says, oh, well, I went to get so-and-so because I couldn't believe it. So I brought him in to look. And a lot of people were walking through that crime scene.
Absolutely. And a lot of people that were not investigators.
Right.
That were operators, Navy SEALs.
Right.
Once the investigator, the NCIS investigator came and he did his cursory check of the crime scene, made notes. He gave an order to one of the SEALs, who was the last person to see Job alive, and said, at no point in time will you touch his body, will you do anything to this crime scene.
Leave it as it is.
Which is great advice. The error occurred when they left the crime scene and the key to Job's room was given to that Navy SEAL. The NCIS guy leaves. Who
was also the person who found him.
Yeah, last person to see him alive and the person who found him.
Mm-hmm.
He left the key to the room with the Navy SEAL that found him. That is a 100% step number one, no. Crime scene preservation, you have to, first of all, you leave someone from the NCIS has to remain on scene at all time and is logging every person that enters or exits that room. There's not a time when once you establish a crime scene that you leave the crime scene unattended and then revisit the crime scene hours later. So there was quite a bit of time from the time between when the NCIS agent did his initial cursory just looking at the room, just determining that this is definitely a crime scene, something happened here, we have to figure out what it is. And he leaves the key with the Navy SEAL who found Job till the time when additional agents came in and they began to work the crime scene.
Correct.
When that NCIS agent left the room, he gave strict instructions that nothing was to be tampered with, nobody was to touch the body, nothing was to happen to Job's body. And unfortunately, that's not what happened.
Yes. What I do know is that when he was brought to Dover for the second autopsy, I guess you would say.
Well, the autopsy itself.
The autopsy itself, yeah. I mean, they brought him, he had mitts on his hands.
That were not there present.
I mean, not to be graphic, but Job was found naked.
Right. Which isn't abnormal.
No.
Right.
Some people sleep in the nude.
Right.
But they had him clothed. Now I would think maybe they would say it was out of respect for my brother.
Which is what they said.
Yes. But they'd put a hat on his head. He'd been washed up.
Fully, his entire body was washed.
Yeah, his feet, his hands. He had fatigues on. And that is not the way you conduct an investigation, at least so I've been told by people who do investigations.
And this is, again, I'm looking at this not as Job's high school friend, but as an investigator. When you have a death, and the second part, when I was talking earlier about two red flags that really stood out to me, number one was the time in which the investigation occurred, how quickly it happened, and his body was returned to the United States. Second one was I've been on some higher profile investigations, and you literally ensure that every I is dotted and every T is crossed, and that every procedure is followed to the letter, and that you don't skip steps, because the scrutiny that is going to come from that investigation is going to be much higher.
Right.
If it's somebody who is, say, commander of SEAL Team 4 versus some private who didn't have any responsibilities and may not have been the most high-profile person in the unit. there should never be any change in how you handle that crime scene, but the level of attention and precision that you do it is certainly much higher.
Well, because it would be more public,
absolutely,
and high profile.
But as we found out, that it was very unpublic.
Yes, and there was never really anything in the news about it, other than
the commander of SEAL Team 4.
Commander of SEAL Team 4
dies
by
in
suicide.
theater, but there's no media coverage. And I'm not immune to the fact that since 2012 there have been a lot of high profile military improprieties in the combat zones, some involving Navy SEALs.
Right.
I just find it unfathomable that an investigator would allow access to a room by simply just stating, don't do that. It's like telling a 2-year-old not to touch a cookie sitting on the table. That 2-year-old's going to touch a cookie. I don't care what the logic was by the Navy SEALs within his unit to bathe him, dress him, put a knit hat on him, put mitts on his hands, whatever. I don't care what the logic was. It contaminated a crime scene that had answers to what happened to Joe.
Correct. And I think part of what, my family would like to see happen is because of these things you just stated. I really feel that at the very least, if not reopening the investigation, they need to declare this not a suicide, but undetermined death.
At the very minimum.
Yes.
There have been other missteps. I'll use that word because I don't want to cast aspersions, but things that are not typically done in a death investigation. I've had I'm not happy to say that I had to read all this stuff, and I'm not happy that I had to look at all these photographs of Job and the crime scene photos, because that's not necessarily how you want to remember somebody. And I can only imagine what it's like to be you or your father or Steph. But since no one else is doing that,
right,
you have to do the legwork yourself. Well, and you have to do the hard things.
And I think, when we were talking with my sister-in-law tonight, I think she pretty much said it all. You said, I don't want to overstep. I don't want to talk about anything that might disturb you. We're way beyond that point.
Right.
I don't think there's anything you could tell us that's going to, ruffle my feathers.
So when investigating a suicide or any death that involves a firearm, it happens every time. And there are when a gun is fired into the human body at close range, there are certain things that happened every single time. There will be blood splatter. There will be the path of the bullet. There will be, for trajectory, there'll be gunshot residue. There'll be all kinds of things that are present that in a clean, uncontaminated crime scene, you can collect, analyze, and determine whether or not someone used their own hand to pull a trigger or not. Unfortunately, based on any of the documents, the several thousand documents that I've looked at and you've looked at, I haven't seen anything with a report on gunshot residue. I haven't seen anything on a report of blood splatter patterns to determine whether or not a person could have done that to themselves or whether it was done to them. And I'm not saying that something outside of suicide happened to Job. What I'm saying is no one can tell me that he actually committed suicide and prove that to me, because there's been so many missteps along the way. There's been so many issues with the crime scene and the investigation that it leaves enough unanswered questions for me to go, you haven't proven to me that the person that we know that had never once gone outside of the protocols, the rules, he was a rule follower. He was cognizant of other people's feelings. He was cognizant of what people would look at him for.
And he, as well as who he represented to the Navy.
Yes.
And I would describe him as having the utmost character, as far as there would be no one who could tell him to do something wrong. I don't care if you would have offered him $1 million. He would never take it for principle. And that's who he was. That's who he was since he was a little boy. He has had values, and he believed in those values. And he would not have been swayed by pressure or payoffs. He was a good man who would have fought for the reputation of the Navy SEALs as well.
Right. And I think the underlying thing that sticks in my craw is it's as if no one wants to acknowledge what happened, and no one wants to acknowledge the missteps, and nobody wants to acknowledge how, just from a general perception, everybody's going, what the, something isn't right. And nobody wants to have that conversation officially.
No. And, my sister-in-law, it's been years that we've been dealing with this, trying to get information. We've had
you guys filed Freedom of Information
Act. We
did,
and that's what I was going to just talk about. It goes along with the blood splatter you were talking about. My sister-in-law was advised to ask for records through the Freedom of Information Act when we at first were, we can't get them. So she wrote a letter to the Navy asking for photos of the crime scene. At first they had told us, no, we don't want to give you these because they're too disturbing. And we were like, we don't care.
Right.
How disturbing they are, we want to see them. You are not going to mess with our head. We want answers and we want the truth, and we would like to see these photos. So she writes this letter, and I can read their response to you.
Please.
Right here. Just a moment. I'm dealing with technology.
And this has been years of getting information out.
This has been years of trying to get information.
Right.
So, dear Mrs. Price, the further response to your request seeking information pertaining to the death of your husband, Commander Joe Price, U.S. Navy. Reference is also made to our May 6, 2015 letter. As advised in our letter, we are awaiting the receipt of the compact disc referenced on page 477 from our resident agency that closed. They wrote your son's. Ooh, typo.
I guess it was a standard letter.
Yeah, I think they messed that up. It should have been your husband's investigation. We have recently received a copy of the CD. Upon review, it was determined that the CD was unreadable. Subsequent contact with our resident agency revealed that they forwarded the only CD they maintained. No other copy exists. Therefore, we have no additional responsive records. So what they're saying...
In 2015 and 2012 is when this happened. We're not talking about 1985 when we're using floppy disks. And
what they're saying to us is pretty much this crime scene photos, a lot of them that have blood splatter, things like that, that we're interested in, and being able to determine whether or not Job committed suicide. Well, they disappeared, and you will never have access to them.
I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that there is absolutely 0% chance that the photos that were taken of the crime scene lived solely on one single disk and were not on some mainframe or hard drive or repository with all the information that was obtained at that crime scene. I can tell you that that letter in and of itself is enough to make me go, there is some level of impropriety happening.
Exactly.
And someone knows about that impropriety, and no one has the intestinal fortitude, the guts, the character to publicly state that whether or not your brother committed suicide, and I want to make sure that I'm very clear on this. You, me, no one else will change our opinion of Job and who he was as a man if the end result is, without a doubt, he committed suicide.
Correct. I spoke with the New York Times when their investigator looked into some of this, and I said to him in that article, I said, no matter how Job died, it was an act of war.
Right.
Even if he did kill himself, and I think with 18 years of war and these men's minds, they're not machines, they are men.
Mm-hmm.
Great men, the greatest of men. But I think that we all need to be asking ourselves, how many deployments is too many deployments?
Absolutely.
if I find out my brother killed himself, if they can prove that to me, I will tell you right now, I will be the biggest champion on in his defense, seeking help for every single person.
So
I
that they don't
already
go
feel
through
that way.
Right.
I already, just knowing how, the people are treated, as far as, there was a lot of, I even had people say, we can't hang his picture up because that's promoting suicide. I said, 19 and a half years of honorable 4 Bronze Stars. This is not.
He's a highly decorated Navy SEAL.
This man gave his entire life from when he was 18 years old to when he died, 42. That means nothing because of the manner in which he died. So you're telling me he killed himself, but now you're telling me, well, his wife, she's not going to get any life insurance because it was suicide. Well, if he did kill himself, which I do not think he did, but if he did, why should the wife not get something from this wound of war?
Right.
Why is a family, declined benefits? Hey, PTSD is a very real thing. PTSD is something that has taken the lives of friends of mine. Yeah. It does not make their death any less honorable.
Absolutely.
And I want to be clear that I am in no way stating that, I don't think PTSD is real, that I don't think there's any possibility. I want you to show me, not hide things from me. I want you to show me the truth.
Yep.
I want the truth. I deserve the truth, and more so than I deserve the truth. My father deserves the truth. His wife, his little girl, they deserve answers. He gave so much of his time to our country. Do we not owe him a really good investigation from an outside source that is not tampered with? Someone to look in on this investigation. We have not been spoken to by any member of the team that was over there when he was deployed. We have not been approached as a family. And I understand it's probably a difficult thing to come. I'm sure it was a difficult time for them. I'm sure this messed with their heads a little bit. But I know somebody knows something. Anything. Somebody knows something. And the fact that nobody's talked to us, that just adds to my suspicion.
Yep.
That something is being hid. Normally, this is a very supportive group that when their comrades fall, they rally behind the family. And I know that we're just the father and sister, but wow, how about one person coming up and saying, you know what? Job was, he was a great commander. I'm sorry about what happened. Nothing. And that's suspicious too. And I think part of what I'm doing here today is I'm asking that anyone of those SEALs who was over there, or somebody who worked with him, or somebody who knew what happened to my brother, anything, that they kind of stand up for their brotherhood that Job stood for, I will say, and they come out and they tell us anything. I would like to hear anything, even if it has nothing to do with his death. I would like to hear a story, a funny story about when he was over there, anything. But I would like somebody to have the guts to reach out to us.
I think on many levels, I'm more disappointed by the silence.
Yeah.
And while I think the investigation was egregious, I think it was inept. I would argue that it was criminal. I think the lack of accountability that the Navy has taken, especially the SEAL community has taken over the investigation, is criminal. I think there is enough evidence, and I will say evidence. There are facts that exist. Facts are the crime scene was tampered with. Facts are that Job's body was tampered with. The facts are that there is no visual evidence of the crime scene as it was when he was found for anyone to look at, an outside agency to look at, because they're saying that the only disk that they lived on was broken and there's no way to retrieve any of that information. I think that the questions of the highest level within the naval community, special warfare community, needs to be addressed. I think the United States naval warfare community needs to reopen his investigation. They need to speak to the people that were there the day that he was found, the NCIS investigators. They need to speak to all these people again, and they need to get the answers that this family needs in order to move forward.
Do you want to speak to the fact that investigations were done not right after it happened, but the time lapse that they took to actually have people write their statements?
It was
that's normal?
Yeah, it's the fact that they're in a close community, they're in a war zone, everybody's within, it's not like people are all over the place, they're all together. But there was, it was 12 hours before the investigation started, as far as the crime scene investigation, and it was another 12 hours after that before any statements were taken. I do believe that, based on I've read every statement, there are things that stand out to me as odd. The thing that stands out to me that is odd is that there's a lot of similar terminology, not military terminology, but terminology, descriptive terminology about Job that is consistent in just about every single statement. It's impossible human behavior. My relationship with you would be different than your Dave's relationship with you or your kid's relationship with you. How they see you at any given time will be interpreted differently based on the level of involvement they have with you personally and professionally, right? So I can't imagine knowing Job and knowing the things that they say in part of their statements, which was Job was very professional. He treated everybody with respect, but he didn't allow himself to emotionally get involved with, on a personal level, a lot of his SEALs, because he had to keep that distance, that professional distance. There was a lot of personal level descriptive terms that were used in these statements about Job as if they had some sort of familiarity with him as a human being, as a person. And I think that the fact that every single statement contained those words is a red flag. Not every single person can have the same interpretation of Job. It's impossible, but it seems like that's the way it was coordinated.
And the funny thing is, when I read through those statements, because I too have read every single statement more than once, I just can't believe the way they described him was who they saw.
Right.
Because I know him, and while I don't know him on a professional level, and I'm sure he was colder as far as, like you said, giving yourself space.
Right.
The words they used to describe him.
Didn't know that person.
No.
Well, listen, I would love to continue another hour of this, and I'm sure there will be follow-up interviews on this show from other people and even you. But I want to make sure that everybody understands that the purpose of the show was to find the truth and to provide closure and answers. And absent those things, the fight will continue. And knowing you and knowing your father and knowing the people that love Job, they're not going to rest until answers are found. And it doesn't take a single single CD of pictures to solve this problem.
Right.
It's layered. I believe there's depth to the problems itself, and I believe that missteps and intentional missteps were done in order to create confusion over what happened with Job. And I think if anybody in the Navy SEAL community, the Navy community, and NCIS, anybody involved in the type of stuff we're talking about, if anybody has access to anybody that was there in Afghanistan on December 22nd, 2012, with Job's unit, SEAL Team 4.
Tarin Kowt.
In Tarin Kowt. I urge you to come forward and share the truth. And I urge every leader that was superior to Job, which weren't many within the community, but each one of them, I asked them to look in the mirror and ask themselves, if this was them and their family was asking these questions, would they want them answered? And I think that's what it comes down to. If there's this deep brotherhood, this deep commitment to what it means to be a Navy SEAL, then I believe every single Navy SEAL who served with Job has to look in the mirror and ask themselves, was Job done the duty and the honor and the dignity that he deserved after almost 20 years of service? Bronwyn, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
It was a very enlightening show. I'm sure we will continue this again. at another date, but I'm sure our conversations will continue daily. And I thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of the Two Dates in the Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler, and not every show is going to be about some inspirational story that makes you all feel good. Sometimes we need to do the shows that make you think, make you wonder what's really happening with our soldiers and what's really happening with the acts of war that are going on overseas. And are we truly doing what's right by them by continually sending them into harm's way over and over again, to the point where decisions, investigations, and things of that nature fall through the cracks. Thank you, everybody. God bless, and be kind to one another.